I've been building my 1975 Chevy Blazer for about 6 months now, but I may not be able to continue on this build because of one major issue. As you've seen, we've done tons of metalwork already on the Blazer. We had to cut off the rocker boxes, open everything up, replace parts of the floor, replace parts of the rocker boxes, weld the rocker boxes back on, and just do tons of structural metalwork underneath the Blazer that I didn't do the first time. Now, in order to continue metalwork on the Blazer body, we have to get the Blazer back on the frame. But there's one major issue with my frame. The front of it is actually bent. Now, I knew about this when I first started restoring my Blazer about 2 years ago, but I was just so inexperienced and I didn't know how to fix it. So I was actually just going to leave it like that. But the problem is there are just so many issues that come with a bent frame. It would ride weird, the bumper wouldn't sit straight, the core support is gonna sit a little sideways. So since we're doing it right, we definitely have to fix this. So we went to my grandma's, that's where it had been sitting for the past couple of months, and then brought it back over to the shop. After we got it over to the shop, me and Mike got it unloaded from the trailer, and then it was pretty much time to start the disassembly. So the only thing that really concerned us was we have no experience with frame machines, and we had no idea how we were going to fix this. So once we got the trailer into position in front of the driveway, we took off the straps, Mike set the ramps out into position and decided to bench press a few. And I actually scared Mike a little bit here because I took off the front strap and it started rolling off towards him before he could get that ramp down into place. So now since we got it unstrapped, it was time to push the frame off the trailer and get it into the driveway.
Oh shit. Perfect. Poor frame. She's back again.
Okay, so we got the frame back to the house. This is pretty much where we're going to do the disassembly. Let me show you guys one of the main reasons why I am concerned about this frame. The front of this frame is actually bent, and I actually got the Blazer like that. I bought that other Blazer hoping that the frames were exactly the same and I could just swap them, but turns out they are not the same. So my other option is, my only options really are fixing this frame or trying to find another frame. You actually can't find these frames. They're so hard to come by. So really my only option is trying to fix this frame right here. And really we don't know exactly how bent this frame is. You can see a little bit right there. It bows up more than this side just on this end. So really the first thing that we have to do is actually completely disassemble the frame. That way we can get it on the ground on a flat surface and see exactly how bent it is. And then we pretty much have to figure out how we're going to fix it because we don't know how we're going to do it yet. So that's exactly what we're going to do right now. We're going to start the disassembly on my 1975 Chevy Blazer frame. Now it's a lot of work to completely tear down a frame. We had to remove all of the fuel lines, we had to remove all of the brake lines, we had to remove the engine mounts, and then all of the little brackets and accessories and fuel tank, and pretty much everything that we could unbolt, we got unbolted from the frame. Now if you look at both sides of the front of the frame, you could see on that left side how twisted out, and then it almost looks like it goes up. Looking down the frame rail, that's exactly what you see. So we're gonna have to actually pull it in the opposite direction to bring it back down into place. Now we didn't really need to do all of this work right now, but I figured since the frame was pretty much there, it would just be easiest to do it now. So like I said, we got pretty much everything unbolted from the frame that we could. The only things that are left now were the leaf springs that connect the axles to the frame, front and rear, and then the shocks all the way around. Okay, so we got most of the internals of the frame all the way torn down. All of the old fuel lines are out and they were full of fuel that had been in there for years and years, so it smelled terrible. And then Mike worked on getting the entire tank pulled out. We got all of the little brackets that we could pulled off. So now the plan is, since we are going to just reassemble this frame after we get it back from the frame shop, we are just going to disconnect the leaf springs from the frame. So there's a bolt right here and there's one more bolt right there, and then we're going to drop the whole entire suspension axle assembly out as one unit. That way we just don't waste time reassembling this once it gets back from the frame shop. So we're going to do the same thing in the rear, just the 2 bolts, and then the whole entire rear axle will slide out with the leaf springs on. Once we get those out and the shocks pulled, I mean, the frame will pretty much be ready to go to the frame shop. I'm actually really intrigued to see how bent this frame is, but once we get it down to the frame shop, we'll be able to see exactly how bent it is. So I used my impact wrench to get all 4 of those bolts removed, but then it was stuck in this rear leaf spring perch, and as you can see, I really tried to get it out, but I'm just not strong enough. So what we ended up doing was grabbing a pry bar.
That worked.
And that worked perfectly, and the frame didn't fall on me. So then I just rolled the rear end out from underneath the frame, and then I had to pretty much deadlift the frame while my dad moved these jack stands so we could start on the front. It's really crazy to see how light these frames actually are once you have everything unbolted from them. They honestly look a lot heavier just because they're thick C-channel, but they're really only a couple 100 pounds. And I actually didn't notice that the front sway bar was still connected. We were actually in the middle of trying to move the frame, and the axle was moving with it, and it took me a minute of me staring at the frame to finally realize that the sway bar was still bolted up. So after I got the sway bar disconnected, my dad grabbed the back of the frame, and I moved all of the jack stands and that big bar out of the way. Then I decided to let him hold it for a second to give him some exercise and move to the front. So this time I had to use my muscle. I lifted up the front, and then he moved everything out from underneath it. Then the plan was we both were gonna try and lift the frame up and put it on the trailer.
Okay, it's heavier than I thought.
But my dad was right, it was way heavier than I thought it was going to be, and I was just barely able to get it over in front of the trailer. And me being the nice son that I am, I let him steer the jack while I lifted up the whole back of the frame. And guess who decided to show up 10 seconds later? Michael. But really he came just in time because he was able to help me grab the frame and lift it up and put it on the trailer. So we walked it all the way to the front while my dad was multitasking, trying to get the frame high enough so it didn't run into the back of the trailer. Now this frame was really heavy. You can hear Michael groan right there. And I actually dropped it as Michael got up on the trailer.
Alright guys, welcome back. Today is a new day. We got the trailer on the frame. Wow. We got the frame on the trailer, and now what we have to do is we're gonna strap it down to the trailer. We gotta load up a couple miscellaneous motor accessories that we're gonna throw away, and then we gotta strap the frame down to the trailer. We're gonna take it down to Layton right now, which is about half an hour drive, and that is where hopefully we're gonna be able to straighten the frame. Once this frame is straightened, we'll bring it back, and then we're gonna start reassembly. So let's get this thing strapped down, and let's get on the road.
Once the frame was all the way strapped down, it was pretty much time to go. So I'm heading to a shop in Layton called Nudeez Customs, and that is where they are going to help me straighten the frame of my Blazer. So on that note, it's time to jump in the truck and head down to Layton.
Okay.
So this is Red. He is one of the more experienced guys that works over at Nudeez, and he's the one that's going to help me straighten my frame. Also, huge shout out to Josh for letting me use the shop to straighten my frame today. So the first thing that we had to do was actually get the frame up on these jack stands. After that, we used a couple levels, and we had to make sure that the frame was level with the ground. Of course, you have to take into consideration that sometimes the cement slopes, so you have to make sure everything is perfectly level in order to do correct pulls. We actually had to use little miscellaneous pieces of metal around the shop just to space the frame up enough on the jack stand so that it was perfectly level front and back, and also side to side. So now that everything was level, it was actually time to tie down the frame. So we got a ton of chains and actually tied all of the chains to posts that are cemented in the ground. This was actually one of the more difficult parts of doing this, just because since the frame is up on jack stands, it's really suspended in the air, and so all of the chains, you have to put them all in the correct spot. That way when we pull, it doesn't pull the frame off the jack stands, and it doesn't move in a weird way, and it goes exactly where we need it to go. So So you can see exactly where all of the chains were hooked, and then you can see that little post in the ground where the chains are connected. Now the front horn of the frame, we actually had a hydraulic puller that we connected 2 chains to, and that is what we're going to be pulling the frame with. Now this was actually our first attempt pulling, and you can see the frame moved way too much, and so we had to actually unhook all of the chains, move them around to get the frame to stay right where we needed it to be. Now this is actually the first look at how bent the front of my frame was. So you can see on that body mount there's about a 1/2 inch, and then on this other passenger side it's almost touching the level. You can see it is perfectly level in the center, but there's so much space on the driver, and just look how bent that is on the passenger. So let's do some pulls and let's get that straightened and fixed. Now this frame was being so stubborn, we were trying to pull it from the bottom, and then we also had to put a hydraulic ram up top, that way it could put pressure on it as I pulled it from the bottom. So at this point we kind of figured out what was going on. I actually had to put a slit in the bottom part of the frame because at one point in time, whoever owned this Blazer, however many years ago, jumped this and actually rammed the front of the frame into the ground, which caused a huge buckle right in front of that first cross member. So it actually stretched the metal out, which was pushing it all the way down. So as we were doing our pulls, it was just going all the way back to where it was because the metal was stretched. So I put a slit in it, clearanced it, and then we did a pull, and it actually pulled it right where we needed it to be. So since we got the frame right where we wanted it, I cleaned the metal and then brought the welder over, and we just put one good tack right on the end of it. That way, once we released all of the pressure off of the frame, we were going to make sure that it stayed right where it was supposed to stay and that it didn't go back to the original stretch position that it was in. And you can see in the frame right there, right where I had to do that slit and that tack just to relieve all of that tension. When the metal is stretched like that, there is extra metal, so you have to cut it and shrink it. That is the easiest way to do it, at least for us to do it, was cutting it. There are other machines that you can use to actually heat and shrink the metal, but those were not available to us at the time. So then I climbed underneath and I put a bead on the top and on the bottom just to make sure that it stayed. And then we had to actually do a tiny bit more pulling and pushing just to massage it right where we needed it. But in the end, it came out perfect. So since my frame was fixed, it was time to clean up all of the tools in the shop, and we double checked all of our measurements one more time just to make sure everything looked good. And then it was time to grab the frame and put it back out on the trailer and take it back over to my place where we can finish the reassembly of everything and then get to the next step of this Blazer build. I can't even tell you guys how grateful I am that this frame was fixable. I was so nervous that I was gonna have to try and scour the end of the earth and try and find a brand new frame, but I'm so happy that we were able to fix the original frame that came with this Blazer. So now we're almost back to where we started at the beginning of this video. Just have to throw the front and rear axle on and then we'll pretty much be back.
Okay, so we got the frame back to the house after fixing it at the frame shop, and now we are going to grab the axles and throw the axles underneath it to reassemble this frame so we can get the body back on it. Okay, so the frame is pretty much all the way reassembled. This side was a little bit more difficult just because all of this was bent, all of this was twisted up. So when I originally bolted this up, it sat about a year with these leaf springs on it, and these are brand new leaf springs. And so what I think happened is since I bolted these up, it twisted my leaf springs just because all of this was bent. So now that it was fixed, now this was bent, so we had to twist that back to get it in. But honestly, it wasn't too hard, so the frame is pretty much completely done. So next up, we'll be getting the Blazer body back on the frame. That way we can start mock-up of all of our sheet metal and we can finish all of the rust repair that we have to do on the rest of the Blazer body. We're also gonna be doing a couple of custom patches that I ordered, and then that will pretty much finish up the body, but it needs to be bolted down on the frame. That way we can make sure everything is sitting where it needs to be sitting pretty much. So that is pretty cool. Frame is done for now, and pretty soon this truck is gonna be coming back together. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out.